everyone. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Hi, everyone. My name's Rowan Freeman. I'm one of the founders of Sine Wave Entertainment, the company that has built Breakroom, the product that you're sitting in. I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the entire team. We've been a metaverse technology company working across multiple platforms for about 15 years now. And so it's a great pleasure for us to host this fireside chat with Matthew Ball, who I'm sure you all know has been doing a fabulous job of making the concept of a metaverse understandable to the investment world and the business world. So with that, I'm going to introduce our co-founder, actually, Adam Frisby, who's just going to say a couple of quick words as well, and then we'll hand over to Wagner and Matthew and Jean.
I'd like to thank you all for coming here. I think that the dawn of the metaverse, so to speak, may be upon us. There's been a few false starts before in the sort of 20 years I've been in this space, but it certainly seems like the whole world is talking about this right now, and it's in no small parts to people like Matthew who have been evangelizing it so profoundly for such a long time. But you guys aren't here to listen to me. I think we've got some fantastic speakers here today, so I'm just going to sit in the background as soon as you guys start talking and start building away a little bit.
Great. Well, and I'm Wagner James Au. I'm author of Making of Second Life and New World Notes. I'm really honored to have Matthew Ball here and Jean Park from the Washington Post. And before we jump in, quick housekeeping note there. If you want to ask a question, you can send it by text. Click the hand waving icon in the top middle of the screen and send it in by text. We'll try to get to those as much as possible. I think I saw Philip Rosedale in the audience, so that would be a great honor to have him jump in right after our kind of back and forth with Matthew. But to start, I thought I'd ask this, Matthew, before we talk about Facebook, which I know Jean wants to ask. But to start, Matthew, you've written a lot about the metaverse and how it will transform the internet. I'm wondering about how the metaverse has transformed you personally. Like, was there a moment that you had a metaverse experience where you had an aha incident where you really were convinced that this was the next big thing? Would love to hear about that.
That's a really nice way to start it off. And thanks, everyone, for having me. And really nice to see everyone in the crowd. I think the brilliant thing about this as a topic is lots of people have been pioneering this. Philip's a great example. The Second Life team at large is a great example. Many people in the audience have been writing about this, talking about standards, interoperability, the tech involved. And I think what we're seeing right now is really an uptick in the number of people this concept is reaching, or the number of experiences that people recognize as new and different. I think it's right that a lot of people start the history of the metaverse, not just in terms of terminology from science fiction, but from Muds and Mushes in the 1970s, Habitat coming out from LucasArts in the 80s. But for me, this big distinction, hackneyed though it might be, was playing Fortnite in really the back half of 2018, just because you could start to feel that the pace had picked up. The pace in terms of social technology, of intellectual property, of people who had never thought that they would spend a substantial portion of their daily life with other people. And it was also that point in time in which many people who had never gamed before started to recognize that this was a new form of entertainment that they had to pay attention to. And so I started writing about it around that period at the end of 2018. I'm shocked by how big it has become in 2021. But I think what we've seen is exactly that we've hit this other threshold where this topic feels very real, pervades most of society, and where for the first time, the average person says, I can imagine a substantial portion of my existence in these virtual worlds. Jean, I would love to know what you think. Like, when for you did this go from something that you could see as a longtime gamer into something that actually felt very on the horizon, if you pardon the accidental pun that we will talk about soon?
Sure. First of all, I want to thank Sunny Room and Breakroom, Sunny Tech and Breakroom for having us here. What a beautiful venue, isn't this? And you can already see all the madness already forming behind us.
Yes.
So it's very quite interesting.
The place is being edited in real time, so you're not hallucinating. So.
Yeah, exactly. And to Adam's point, Matthew did broaden understanding of the metaverse to a lot of people, to investors and to the business world, and to journalists as well. And to jump off your question, Matthew, I hate to repeat exactly what you said, but it was really when I was playing Fortnite and just hanging out with folks and not talking about Fortnite at all, and we were just talking about politics most of the time. Especially during 2000, at the end of 2018, when politics was still something that we all talked about. When I started to kind of crystallize that when this image of the metaverse started to crystallize, and it was definitely the involvement of intellectual property clashing inside Fortnite that really brought that to the forefront for me, and that was what attracted me to your writing and to your essays as well, because you made that same connection too. For me, as a longtime journalist, I've been a newspaper man for about 21 years now. I am always thinking about the intersection of business, of advertising, of news, of media, and how media has become a conduit between the community and businesses, right? So when I saw Fortnite started to gather all this IP, I started to think, this could be like the next media. This could be like the next media forefront right here. And obviously, I didn't really put it into words like, "Oh, this is the metaverse," until I read your essay, and I was like, "Oh yeah, this is totally what the metaverse concept was, wasn't it?" And again, what you brought up, I had been playing MUDs back in the '90s, so I have always been fascinated by the idea of living in virtual worlds, interacting with other people. I was to give people some background, not just as a journalist, but as an internet denizen. I was a moderator for a Java-based chat room back on my home island of Guam. It was the only chat room on Guam, and I was only 15 years old. And I had become the most powerful internet person on this small island as a result of my role as a moderator. And it was then when at the ripe young age of 15 and 16 where I really started to understand how information flowed through the internet, how it changes people, and how we change it. So this topic, the metaverse or whatever we might call it, has always been really, really fascinating to me. And it was really nice to read your essays to kind of really put to words like what I had been thinking about for a while too.
That's great.
Yeah. I guess we could start with I guess we could start with the elephant in the room, or as Matthew called it, the rabbit on the stage. But we're not going to be talking about the rabbit on the stage and Adam here. We're going to be talking about Facebook. Just yesterday, The Verge reported through a source that Mark Zuckerberg has been considering changing the branding of Facebook, whether it's a company name or the parent company name, to something else and something that would reflect its new stated metaverse intentions. So, Matthew, I just want to get your first quick takes on that. Well, what do you think?
It's a funny question. I mean, the Washington Post wrote a piece. This wasn't Eugene, but someone had written a piece, I think about 2 months ago, right when Zuckerberg had announced his intention to become a quote unquote metaverse company. And there was a very cynical take that reflected, and a large frog just landed on the stage, that reflected the cynicism that it was a desire to eschew regulation that had motivated Facebook's interest in the metaverse. I can understand that perspective by trying to highlight that there is a next generation internet coming, and therefore, no matter how solidified our power today, we might lose it tomorrow. And indeed, recent tech history suggests that that is the case. IBM didn't really have to lose its mainframes to be displaced. It was actually a new computing format, much like Windows never lost the PC, it lost on mobile. I tend to think that's actually a little bit uncharitable. It's clear that Zuckerberg has been focused on this category for years. Control Labs, a brain-to-computer interface company, was acquired years ago. Oculus, of course, acquired years earlier. His famous Unity memo. And so I take it sincere that this is not a incidental or random or recent or regulation-oriented focus on the metaverse. When we speak more specifically about the rebranding, They've rebranded a few different times. They've oscillated on Facebook. The Facebook company 3 years ago, they started unifying all of the accounts and all of the branding. And so there's a lot of history around that. Ultimately, the name is not that consequential. Most people don't change it, but Alphabet did it to represent a new org structure. I can understand the merit in trying to highlight to your company how different you think you're going to be. And so I think there's some merit to cynicism, but I actually think that they genuinely believe that this is important beyond symbol.
I think that's true. I think a lot of people who don't pay attention to Facebook or what the tech industry has been doing were kind of caught off guard by this metaverse concept, especially since Zuckerberg hurdled the phrase and the concept into the mainstream. And I think, you know, as a reporter, I've been dismayed by seeing a lot of reporters kind of like fumble themselves and trying to explain it. I won't mention names here, but it's very clear that Zuckerberg has been interested in this for a while. And one thing about Facebook is that Facebook is so deeply integrated into the rest of the internet that I think that they would have to be a major player into the metaverse concept, whether they even declared their intention or not. What do you think about that? And also your initial essays didn't really highlight Facebook as much, despite Zuckerberg's investments over the year. I was wondering why the Facebook wasn't top of mind when you immediately started to talk about the metaverse.
I think it's, look, they did not have, I'll answer your last question first.
Sure.
Facebook does not have a popular virtual tooling platform. They don't have many virtual experiences. They don't have, or did not have, widely deployed hardware 3 years ago. They even don't really today. Oculus is a market leader. I enjoy the product. Most people who actively engage with VR prefer Oculus, but it is still an incredibly niche device. And so if you say that you don't really have tools for virtual simulation, you don't have games or experiences that use them, you don't have physical hardware, and therefore you also don't have an operating system, it's very difficult to say that that's a leadership position. Now, time and platform shifts change all things, but right now I think many people rightly limit Facebook's relevancy to the burgeoning investments, the seriousness with which they take the opportunity, and the fact that they have the world's most proliferated and used identity system. There's 3 billion daily active users across the Facebook ecosystem. There's 2 billion across Facebook.com. That's an incredibly potent resource, and we have only underestimated social graphs in the quote-unquote Web 2 era.
I recently... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for quick background, and I think it's possible it's a combination of a PR stunt and genuine intent. One of Zuckerberg's early-ish hires was Corey Ondraka, who was the founding CTO of Linden Lab, Second Life. So a few years after he left Second Life, Corey was one of the people who helped put together the Oculus deal. So, and that was way back in 2012 or something. So, and he brought in some other Linden Lab veterans to join the Facebook team. And I remember one of them, Jim Perbrick, said, I can't believe I'm working for a metaverse company again. So a lot of that's been happening in the background before people started discussing what's been happening recently.
Yeah, I was struck, Matthew, by your comment just now about how we've underestimated social graphs, and it feels like I recently, to the audience who might not know, I recently did a deep dive into Epic Games and Fortnite and what Epic Games' vision for the metaverse is, and Seema Sistani, who is the former CEO of House Party, and who is still within Epic Games, said that, you know, kind of likened that the age of social media is kind of coming toward an end, at least social media as we've known it. Do you kind of agree with that, Matthew? Do you think that social media, because you know, for background for the audience, I've been a social media editor at the Washington Post before I was a gaming journalist, so I've been very much involved in watching trends in social and everything. And one of the most common questions I get from clueless reporters are, Gene, what's the next big social media app that I need to be on? And for some years now, I've been saying there really isn't much left, and I think it's taken me a long time to kind of admit that. I think social media innovation has kind of stagnated a bit. Matthew, would you agree with this take? What do you think explain to me more. How do you think social media could be built as a foundation for the metaverse?
It's a good question. There's also some in the chat asking who is speaking, and if we could indicate, I put a hand above my name. I'm in the checked suit with the blue vest. It looks like I'll put a heart as well. And then Gene is in the black suit. He was speaking just a moment ago.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'll put a star.
I'm in the white suit.
And that was James. The interesting thing here is on the social graph. One of the things that's always been fascinating to me when we take a look at Epic as an example is the extent to which so much of their strategy has actually been public, often from Tim's Twitter, which gets a lot of attention now, but he has been tweeting for several years. If you go back to their 2019 year in review, you'll find Tim and a few other Epic colleagues talking on a Christmas-themed couch about their ambition. And this is when he was talking about Epic Online Services, their Steam Key or Steamworks solution that is instead open to the rest of the industry and doesn't charge, doesn't limit, doesn't lock in. And he made this point of, we could charge for this, but it's more valuable to us if it's free. That's because it will be more widely distributed. And as a result, it better builds out that social graph. And that seems to be an important element of how Epic is going to grow, how Epic is going to drive interoperable standards, interoperable ecosystems, and asset portability and so forth. When you're asking about these social graphs, I think it's interesting to reflect why we now think that these virtual worlds and virtual platforms will supplant today's social media. In some regard, you can think of the last several generations of the internet as bringing to life our online identity. In the 80s and 90s, I'm sure many of us in the audience remember going on IRC chats or message boards. Your identity was your username, but it was mostly come across in blanket and simple text. Later, we get to the MySpace and the Facebook era. We now have the technical capabilities and the networking infrastructure to represent your identity with images. You have a homepage, you have a Facebook profile, you have a display picture. We went from text to limited 2D. Then eventually we start to get the infrastructure required to be content creators and to distribute video. And so you have this new generation of YouTubers, now TikTok stars, Snapchat, much higher resolution, much higher quality, non-static imagery for identity representation. We've gone from text to limited 2D to rich 2D. We've gone from static information to live information. And now we're getting to this new place, which is 3D. It's immersive. It's an avatar. It's a recreation of us. That's just the next wave. And when it comes to the capabilities of who can actually do that, it does seem like it's mostly gaming platforms or virtual worlds. There's a second element of that, which I think relates to the philosophy of these companies, which is oriented around a sense of fun and play rather than just content delivery and algorithmic-based engagement. And so I think there are two ways in which you can look at it. One is the technical evolution, which leads us to an experience such as this. And the other is the philosophy that makes it a more compelling place for audiences.
That's really great. And
Go ahead.
I'd love to continue that theme, and I discussed this in last summer's fireside with Philip over there. But what's both of your take on what I call the metaverse age cliff? The platforms we're generally describing, like Fortnite, they're very popular with preteens and teens. Then usage seems to rapidly drop off once people age out of their 20s. It seems like Fortnite's user base seems to be going down a little bit steadily, and that could be part of it. So, basically, what's your take on, is the metaverse mainly for kids?
I'll take a stab at that. This is Gene Parker, the Washington Post. I'll just start identifying myself too. My thinking is, and from my very uninformed opinion, is that I don't think we'll be able to see a fully realized metaverse until like a while later. So it almost seems like that the folks who wouldn't get the metaverse would probably, and pardon my blunt terms, will probably just die by the time it comes out. I'm already 40, and it's already like only just happening now. So for me, I feel like that this is any talk about the metaverse feels like it's still far off in the distant future. But Matthew has written many times that one of the most interesting things I've seen about in Matthew's essays is about how kids interpret Roblox, and this was something that really hit home for me. Like I mentioned, I'm a 40-year-old gamer. I ignored Roblox to my own peril because I thought the graphics were ugly, and it was just like I'm just not into creating my own things, and it just looks like a very unengaging experience. I grew up on the idea that graphics need to look amazing and better, but obviously, I'm not those kids. Those kids are now having this expectation of this is how content is going to be delivered to me. Like this is a standard way to deliver content, to deliver graphics to me. So like I think I've underestimated like the appeal of something like Minecraft and Roblox, and what kind of effect that has on the children today, and what kind of adults, what kind of media consuming adults those children are going to grow into. So that's kind of been my perspective.
Interesting. Matthew?
I don't have too much to add. I think that Gene put it this way. I mean, look, one of the brilliant things here was there was this period of time in which Hollywood asked, when are kids going to stop watching YouTube and start watching TV, capital TV? And the answer is, look, they made a little bit more room in their life, partly because they matured and they didn't have to go to school and sleep for 20 hours a day. But for the most part, the YouTube consumption hasn't gone away, and to the extent in which it has, it's been supplanted by TikTok and even more TikTok. And then we're seeing in a younger generation now this question of, is a 10-year-old girl spending 2 hours a day on Roblox because she can't appreciate other mediums? You could argue that. I think it's wrong. But it's more likely that they never move away from that. Jensen Huang has this great, he's the CEO and founder of NVIDIA. He had this great line where he said, everyone born today is a gamer. That means there's 140 million new gamers born each year. It takes time for them to age to the point in which they can engage with these platforms. But I think he's right. I think that's an inexorable shift that will change the world. Right now, gaming remains actually pretty niche. It's funny, I hear this stat all the time that drives me a little bit nuts, where people say video gaming is 4 times the size of the box office. That's true, but the box office is 1/15 of the video industry. The truth of the matter is video reaches 5.5 billion people per day for an average of 2.6 hours per day. In the United States, there's 300 million Americans who watch 5.5 hours of video per day. That sounds crazy. I promise you it's the truth. But the consequence of that is that we know that everyone in Gen Y games more than the average person in Gen X. Gen Z games more than Y, and Gen Alpha games more than Z. How much of that is sustainable? Unclear, but that overall shift seems unlikely to change. And in turn, their identities are increasingly situated in places like this. It's actually really interesting.
Oh, go ahead, James.
When you, this is Matt. When you take a look at the chat, there's a portion of the audience, for example, that is frustrated by the amount of imagery that's being put on the stage. And it's actually a good question of, that's a totally valid opinion, but I think there's one question, which is how much of that is generational, right? There was certainly a period of time in which information overload and notification bombing, the number of emails, it's kind of like decibels. In the 70s, we thought the max amount of decibels that you could hear at a concert before ruining your ears was a fraction of what it is today. Information overload is something that changes over time. And we may actually find out that this younger generation just experiences is affected by very different experiences that we actually can't really sensitize down to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at the background image right now, and I actually think it's kind of beautiful. So, I think like I like to think that I have a younger mind than most of my peers, and I'm looking at this and all this chaos, and I'm like, this is actually beautiful,
Yeah, it's like lucid dreaming.
Yeah. Well, all the filter changes. let me switch gears a little bit to interoperability. I hate that word. And
Yeah.
and
An acronym.
yeah, exactly. And regulation. The Washington Post last month reported that Facebook has been really doing a hardcore press push in Washington D.C. To talk to regulators and having this early jump conversation with on how to build the metaverse. What do you think about that, Matt? Do you like who do you how do you see regulation and interoperability forming it for the metaverse? Is it really going to be like what Tim Sweeney has referred to, kind of like the Ultimate Aim Alliance back in 1991, where IBM and Microsoft all worked together to kind of put together the protocols and standards for the internet we know today? Do you feel optimistic that we're gonna have that today too?
It's a good question. I mean, I've been talking about this quite a bit recently, and I think there's this dominant belief that government is behind technology. And I think that that's a very valid opinion because it does seem to have been true, at least in the modern digital era, post Y2K and arguably post 1990. As a result, there are entire generations of investors and consumers who look at government regulation and say, well, finally, you're starting to get some of it, but where have you been all this time? And the truth of the matter is, over modern history overall, government has been a lot more involved in industry, regulation, standardization, whether you're talking about telecommunications, energy, the mining and oil industry. You can go back to the formation of banking, the breakup and regulation of US Steel, of Standard Oil, of why the railway systems are fairly coherent in the United States and fairly standardized, not just with swapping stations, but with consistent spacing of rails. It's actually relatively recent that the US government in particular has been behind the technological changes and the challenges that they produce for individuals. If you take a look in the 80s, you can find, for example, that long after the DARPA experiments to produce the internet, you had the Internet Engineering Task Force, a DoD-based initiative to actually drive interoperability and common standards across the internet. The Internet Engineering Task Force exists today, decades later. It's not run by the US government anymore, but it is still one of the reasons why the internet is so commonly driven and open today. And so when we take a look at the future, I'm optimistic that the government is going to start to decree certain user rights, certain data policies, the embrace of various standards, rather than just try to regulate companies that have become too powerful. I think if you've only paid attention to the last 25 years of history, you can be very pessimistic. But if you take a look at a much broader view, you can see the opportunity for more change.
That's great.
Oh, go ahead, James.
Oh, I wanted to jump a little on the regulation issue and talk about, I'm sure you saw the expose on Roblox this summer, detailing how difficult it is for creators to make any real money from the platform, to the point where it's like script from the old industrial times. And most of these creators are kids, and Roblox is now a public company. How big a problem do you think this is going to be for Roblox down the road? Especially on a regulation perspective, when senators go, my kid is in there and look what happened. So what are your thoughts on that, both of you?
First, Gene.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, with the Roblox thing, I feel like that the Roblox issue is very important, right? To catch people up, there was a wonderful and insightful and investigative video essay on YouTube where this creator, and I'm forgetting his name, so I apologize for that.
Oh, Quentin.
Quentin, yes, he went and basically reported that Roblox creators, many of them kids, are only getting all these Roblox skills that not getting paid much for it, and these building skills, are not much applicable in the outside world. I think it's a little too early to be worrying about whether those skills would be applicable in the outside world, because again, like the mentality, the creative mentality to build in Roblox isn't going to go away. They're going to adapt to other platforms, and they're probably going to create otherwise. I think Roblox and Epic Games being essentially still being a walled garden, despite Tim Sweeney decrying walled gardens. I think that comes with part of the growing pains of the metaverse. Like we're just not there yet. It's not real. So like we're gonna have a lot of issues where, well, this doesn't seem like the metaverse. Yeah, clearly, because it hasn't been fixed yet. Like we haven't figured that out yet, and there's still so many messes on the internet right now that still need to be addressed too. And this is something that I've written about in my very first metaverse piece in early 2020.
Yeah, I find this to be a little bit more of a difficult conversation because I think that we're conflating a whole bunch of different issues.
Mm-hmm.
First and foremost, we have to take a look at what the rev share situation is. So when you take a look at YouTube versus, let's say, Roblox, they're paying roughly the same share of their net revenue. The challenge is YouTube doesn't need to pay 30% of its revenue off the top to Apple, even when it's happening on an iOS device because of the way in which the App Store runs. It is very difficult for any platform to take its own platform fee for profit, to pay another platform fee to the operating system, to then invest in their own business, and then to pay considerable economics to the developer. On an accounting basis, Roblox is losing a lot of money despite the fact that they're putting 1/4 of net revenue into the developer. If we wanted to say, how do we make Roblox developers more successful, the answer has to be a mixture of more money to Roblox. Therefore, the rate can stay the same, but a total larger sum goes to developer, or Roblox has to pay more to developers out of its own revenue. But again, it's already losing money. And in fact, what you want Roblox to do is drive more revenue to Roblox through R&D. One of the most brilliant things about Roblox over the past year and a half is they've actually maintained their R&D as a percentage of revenue. I believe it's at 20% or so, 18 to 22%. So even though its revenue has gone up roughly 3x over the past year and a half, they've, as a result, invested 3 times more in R&D. That's good for every developer. It's good for every user. This year, they will spend $140 million on R&D. Gene knows this, but like most AAA games will cost $250 million in lifetime. And we're talking about getting to a point in which more than that is invested each day. This is, I think, one of the reasons why Tim feels so strongly about the Apple tax, which is you have to ask this question of, for every $100 that goes to Roblox, what's the right allocation? We would agree that Roblox that is building this experience deserves compensation. We would agree that they need the profits through which they can reinvest. And we would agree that at the end of the day, the most important participant is the developer making that end user experience, which attracts Robloxers in the first place and therefore leads to revenue for Roblox. Ultimately, growing the Roblox ecosystem and driving profitable, healthy businesses for the developer is in Roblox's interest. I think the challenge is how much might be pulled out of the top before that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting conversation to have that will evolve, I'm sure. I think, Gene, we have time for one more question before we go to Q&A. If you wanted to hit us with the next one.
Sure, I do have one more question. Matthew, one of the criticisms I get whenever I write about the metaverse, and I'm sure you hear about it all the time, is why is it all these billion dollar companies building the next internet? Like I don't want these billion dollar companies, whether it's Epic Games, Facebook, or Roblox, to determine my identity or whatever in the internet. I guess for me, it's like, again, the AIM Alliance and the Internet Engineering Task Force were all built by major corporations back in the day. The internet today, as we speak, we're playing on the rules of major corporations. So I guess my question is, Matthew, do you see a more egalitarian internet? Do you see smaller companies being able to contribute meaningfully to the metaverse? Will it just be billion-dollar companies like Facebook, Epic Games, and Roblox, and Microsoft with Minecraft and the Azure cloud? Basically, will they remain the architects of the next internet?
It's a great question. I think it requires a lot of pessimism, a mixture of cynicism, and probably some ignorance to argue that the future is only going to be the mega corporations. The truth of the matter is we always see change happen, and it's partly because innovation is recursive, which is to say someone creates something that leads to new behaviors or new use cases, which leads to another thing being created, which leads to new opportunity. No one who understood mobile internet or the internet and its protocols would have predicted that we were getting to a world of Wall Street bets, Robinhood, YOLO trading. There was no conviction you could have 5-10 years ago to believe that TikTok was going to be the largest competitor to Facebook to emerge in a decade. The truth of the matter is there's a long history of misprediction, and the error types are manifold. So, for example, if we take a look at why Microsoft missed mobile, a lot of people say that it's because they underestimated the iPhone. But the truth is, they made many errors. For example, they believed that smartphones would be the secondary device for most people, not the primary one. They believed that keyboards were going to be the primary input, not touchscreens. They believed that businesses were going to lead the adoption curve, not consumers. They believed that the primary monetization for the operating system was licensing, not app stores and data collection. Mark Zuckerberg didn't launch a app native client for 5 years until 2012. The App Store came out in 2008. In 2009, the ad campaign, There's an App for That, came out. In 2010, Sesame Street parodied that ad campaign, and it wasn't another 2 years until Zuckerberg bet on apps, not HTML5, in thin clients. Mm-hmm. Within 1 month of shifting from HTML5 to native, Facebook reported they had doubled time inside that app. But what happened in the interim? In 2009, WhatsApp was founded specifically to focus on app-based mobile comms. At the time, Facebook had 350 million monthly active users, an extraordinary network, a nearly $100 billion market cap, and yet by 2014, they had to buy the company for $20 billion. Some reports say that WhatsApp is larger than any other Facebook mobile service, including Facebook Messenger and the Facebook app. There is such a long history of new companies cramming in, and I think in some regard, that's why, although the metaverse feels somewhat far away today, all of the biggest companies in the world are now obsessed with it. It's one of the reasons why Mark Zuckerberg thinks that declaring publicly, telling investors, telling employees, telling business partners, we've got to go there, and then changing the name of the company is an effort to not miss it. Everyone understands disruption theory, but that doesn't mean you're not still at risk. And I think everyone knows that there's going to be change. And so I'm optimistic. I also think that consumers, voters, users, developers have agency in which companies lead.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And actually, I think that's a good point to move to some audience questions. Adam had a question. He's the creator. And hopefully, Philip, if you're still there, we'd love to bring you on stage for a comment. But Adam, first, if you have a question to throw out there as the button.
Putting me on the spot here, aren't you? Didn't realize I had to come up with a question as well. These are all the magic sides of it. No, I think that the question that everyone wants to know is when. When do you think that the world as a whole is going to reach the point that most users are familiar with and have access to a metaverse?
It's a tough question. I mean, the truth of the matter is the vast majority of people can already access some of these experiences, which we would identify. Roblox is a good example. PUBG last year had in excess of 150 million DAUs, most of which were in Southeast Asia, India, and China. You take a look at a game like Free Fire has more than 120 million DAUs, most of which are on low-end Androids, very few of which are in the West. When you take a look at a title like Fortnite, even at its peak, the Epic versus Apple lawsuit suggested that DAUs were around 30 to 35 million. The truth of the matter is there are titles doing 4 to 5 times that on a regular basis, and they're running on the lowest end devices on Earth. So I think it's more of a question of generational shift plus some progressive increase in hardware capabilities. And then to a separate extent, when the experiences deserve it for the average person.
That's excellent. And it's Philip, are you there? Let's see if he's on the.
I sure am. I'm standing on the stage two down from you.
Cool.
Hey there. Welcome.
Hi. Thanks
Honored
for
to have
having
you
me.
there. Definitely.
Oh, there he is. Awesome.
In his original Second Life avatar.
Sweet. I see it.
Or a pretty good facsimile. Thanks, you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you have a thought to add to this that we could riff on?
Well, on the conversation of how we all get in here, how we get everybody in the metaverse, I think that we've got, I guess the funny statement I thought of the other day was that with the metaverse, we have to jump our motorcycle both across the chasm and over the uncanny valley at the same time. I think that one of the fundamental drivers of adoption of these types of environments, this kind of general metaverse idea, still is getting people comfortable with being avatars. And of course, that's a very age related thing, but it's still important in the testing that we have done in the last few years with things like people using avatars for work. People are still uncomfortable, meeting as three-dimensional avatars like this, or I should say most people are. And so I think that's still a challenge we've got to wade through. And one of the reasons why we see kids being the leaders of these worlds, as you discussed earlier, as opposed to adults.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Matthew or Gene?
Yeah, for me, I guess I'm real comfortable with being in his avatar. I mean, I can fly right off stage, and that's a thrilling thing. And if I wasn't here in this panel, I'll be doing it right now.
We should fly after the panel.
Oh, we'll definitely fly off.
Yeah, flying was always a magic thing in Second Life as well, as you well remember, Wagner.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. And to remind everyone, if you want to text the question, click the hand icon and send in a text message. We have a few coming down. And Matthew, unless you wanted to talk about the adoption of avatars.
Just a quick note, it's not the hand icon, it's the question mark icon to submit a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question?
No, I was just making a joke in the chat of anything but Zoom. I wonder to what extent that experience, especially for kids for the past year and a half, makes avatars, which to Philip's point might have seemed foreign or hard to grok, a far more intuitive way, or not less intuitive, but just comfortable way. Gosh, I mean, yeah. I certainly prefer this to going on a Zoom call.
I absolutely do too. And
yes,
I think a lot of children, we want to talk about the YouTube age, a lot of children have already been the idea of respecting or admiring someone else via the virtual YouTubers, the VTubers. That idea has already been normalized for a lot of people. It's like, this person is this 3D animated person, and I'm okay with paying money to this person who's completely hiding their face. So it almost kind of reminds me of the recent conversation of internet anonymity and how how that keeps coming up, where it's like, okay, we need to have internet anonymity to keep things safe. And it's like, for me as a chat moderator, I know that really doesn't do anything. Like, people are really going to be comfortable being themselves. So there's a lot of questions about identity and comfort and what we want to put in here. And I think it's definitely going to be generational. I'm sure there's a comfort level that I'm not with. VTubers. I don't really watch VTubers. I like seeing people's faces, but that's a completely different thing for someone else.
Yeah, definitely. And to get to, I think we're almost out of time, so I want to get to some of the audience questions. Nicolay asks, can you elaborate on your thoughts regarding metaverse and blockchain NFTs and how that enables interoperability and commerce in the metaverse?
Matthew, that's all you because I don't get it. So
Me either. I'm just gonna say it's mostly hype, but Matthew should jump in.
As long as I don't stumble myself into last night's crypto NFT debates, which are well documented online, but I am not participating in. Look, I think that there are two important ways to think about this. One is the generally interesting decentralized computing capabilities of the blockchain and what that means for scalability. I mean, the truth of the matter is when we're talking about the infrastructure or the enormity that we imagine for the metaverse, there's a good question as to how do you operate that and how do you store that? How do you write that information? And then there are questions around governance and how centralization is an important element, or how centralization aids standards formation, but it also produces other concerns. But I think the second way that we can look at blockchain is just the importance of finding anything that multiple different groups can agree upon as a standard to all work towards. There are a lot of things that people assume about NFTs and how they can be used into a virtual world, whether that's coherent, whether or not Activision, EA, and Riot can all pull on information that allows you to buy a trading card and then use it into each environment. And the glossing over the complex technicals there is actually really unproductive. But there's a separate element, which is we have many, many different parties that are agreeing to work on something and something that their competitor doesn't own. As hard as it is to get 4 mega corporations to agree, it's harder still to get them to agree on any standard that one of them owns. And so I'm optimistic that in one way, shape, or form, if just from an educational perspective, as everyone chases after NFT money, that it might lead us to a little bit more standardization.
That's really good. And I think we have time for one more anonymous question. What are the IP implications for brands in the metaverse, and how can creators protect their assets? That's definitely going to be a huge one coming up. Matthew?
I think, look, that's a hard one. I don't have a good answer for you there, partly because we're talking about, there's really two different ends here. There's the Disney end, and then there's the individual creator end. And we're decades into the internet and don't have a good answer for that. I think that would take another 20 minutes.
Be a good time to have a sequel, sounds like. I think we have to wind down. We're streaming all of this on Chrome, so that's one of the issues to deal with is the costs of the streaming from the cloud. But Adam, Rowan, did you want to say anything before we wrap up? Actually, then we'll turn it over to group conversation. We'll turn everyone's mics on, and everyone can hang around and chat. And there's kind of a gallery behind that has a lot of Matthew's articles. So yeah, thank you again, Matthew, for appearing, and Gene for being such an awesome co-host. And